Hey, gang, and welcome to another exciting episode of Biology Online. And today we're going to talk about evolution and natural selection. To get us started, imagine that you lived in an environment, or that there was an environment out there that on a different planet, maybe in a different universe, wherever you want your little environment to be. And there's an organism living in that environment. And do you see her on the screen? No, you don't see her? Well, let me help you see her. So there she is, and her name is Dot. And as you could tell, Dot was very, very well adapted for the environment that she lived in. If you're a predator trying to pick her off, you'd have a lot of trouble doing that because her camouflage allowed her to blend in perfectly. So just like on her planet, she's doing fine, moving around, doing good. Just like on her planet, our planet also changes. Um, Either through seasonal changes. This is South Mississippi. I mean, the weather changes every single day. One day it's hot, one day it's cold, yada, yada. But let's say on her planet, maybe she wakes up one day and it has snowed. So the question is now, is she still fit? Is she still well adapted for her environment? Well, the obvious explanation would be no. It's a lot easier for a predator to see that contrast in color between her and the snow than it was before when she was living on that gray rock. So if she lives long enough to reproduce, and she reproduces through sexual reproduction, just like we do, and we know that whenever you reproduce through sexual reproduction, one of the big things that you gain from that is that all of your offspring will be different from each other. You're not an identical copy of your brothers and sisters, unless you're a twin. That's a different sort of set of circumstances. Also, you're not identical copies of your parents. There are variation in the individuals within a population. So let's say she reproduces, and boom, there's the variations, and just of her coat color. Which one of these do you think would be the most likely to be picked off by a predator based on the environment that they're in now? I think most people would agree that the darker coloration, the darker coat color, has the biggest contrast. And so a predator will see that one a lot easier. So it's most likely going to get picked off by a predator. So let's see, yeah, right there. It was a natural mutation that occurred. All of the offspring are natural mutations, but that particular variation in this particular environment didn't do so well. Nature picked that one off. Well, if the other two live long enough to reproduce, they'll do just like their parent, and they'll produce offspring that are variations of that have variations with them. So let's go to the next generation. There we have it. So there's our color variations. Now, for this generation, which ones stand out the most, or which one do you think is most likely to be picked off by a predator? And again, as long as the environment stays with this white color, as long as there's snow everywhere, then those two lighter ones will be picked off, or more likely to be picked off by a predator. The other two are a little bit closer to the actual the actual color of the environment. And so we see that they'll probably survive, and that the other color variations will be picked off. And just like before, if those ones that are left live long enough to reproduce, they'll produce offspring that are variations of their genomes. And there we go. So as you can see, over time, that this species went from having a gray coat color because of the environment that they lived in. When the environment changed, slowly over time, nature, just by being difficult to live in, selected against the darker colorations of coat color, and it promoted the lighter coat colors. Now, if the environment had changed in a different way, let's say instead of going from gray to white, it went from gray to black, maybe a volcano went off and everything was covered in soot, we would expect to see pretty much the opposite, right? We would start seeing a selection towards the darker variations and a selection against the lighter variations. So it's all based on the environment in which you live and how that environment changes. And we can see here that over time we can start seeing this species gravitate towards a different color. And maybe over time they would become so different from the original species that they would become two separate species. And that's all. This is it. This is evolution. We see this happening all the time from generation to generation. The problem is it happens slowly. And species that reproduce don't reproduce as quickly. It takes a longer time to see it. in species that reproduce very quickly, like bacteria and viruses. We see this all the time, and it's measurable, and it's visual. So there it is, evolution. So that's evolution. So let's put a definition with that. So evolution is any change in the heritable traits between generations within a population. And I can understand where that would be a little bit confusing. So any change in the heritable traits, your heritable traits, those are your genes. So any change in the genes. And we know that for sexual reproducing species like ours, that we know all of our offspring are going to be different. We're a combination of the genes between our parents. So there you have it, right? And it happens between generations. Evolution does not occur to an individual. Your genes are set. If your genes change at any point in time, you're probably going to get cancer and die. You don't want our genes to change. But between the generations, between me and my kids, between my parents and me, evolution has occurred. It doesn't mean better than, it just means different. And those differences are what allow us, our species, the chance to survive through whatever nature's going to throw at us, whatever changes are going to come. Is everyone going to survive? No. Some are not. Some end up with traits that just happen to not be the best fit for a particular environment. Others end up with traits that are a great fit for the environment. So it's not really about the survival of the individual, it's the survival of the species. And within a population, well, that's simply because it's kind of hard to reproduce with somebody that's not kind of standing next to you. So it has to be within your population. So looking at these pictures, between parents and offspring, evolution has occurred because they're not copies of their parents and they're not copies of each other. The genes have changed, slightly maybe, but still, they're not identical, so that's a change in the heritable traits. And it happens between the generations within that population. Same thing here, parent to offspring, evolution. Parent to offspring, evolution, evolution, lots of evolution, evolution, and of course also with humans, evolution, because we're not copies of our parents. We are individuals with our own unique genome, and that gives us some characteristics, whether it be physical, or be a biochemical or behavioral, that allows us to cope with the environment around us in different ways. And hopefully, some of those traits will be a benefit to us that allow us to survive better and reproduce better and pass those genes on to the next generation. So you can't talk about evolution without talking about natural selection. Just by being difficult to live in, the nature selects against undesirable traits, and it promotes desirable traits. So that's what drives the process of evolution. So let me give you an example. So let's say that you've got these two lions, and they have their babies, right? And they got the cubs. Maybe one is kind of shy, and one is kind of bold. And that's just behavioral traits, which are determined genetically. And let's say at nighttime, the shy one stays back. It's too shy, right? But the bold one ventures out at nighttime. Well, in Africa, in that environment with so many other large predators around, I think that's the best trait to have, to be able to venture off on your own. I mean, it didn't work out too well for Simba when he left and went to the elephant graveyard, right? There's predators out there that can pick you off, right? And so being shy, in some cases, may be better than being bold. So nature would select against the bold trait. It would make lions, especially cubs, a little bit more shy, to stay back behind, to stay where there's protection. But there's other things in nature that can kill you, right? What about viruses and bacteria? Yeah, our resistance to those things are genetic. And we all know that there's some individuals get sick easier, right? We see it all the time in our population. You know that one individual that gets sick from everything, and then there's others that don't get sick at all, and you kind of like, wow, they must be He-Man, and so forth and so on. You can also die from exposure to heat. Being in a desert, it can kill you. Heat can kill you, not just fire, but getting too hot. On the vice versa, getting too cold, that can kill you. Nature's a pretty dangerous place, and just by being difficult to live in, nature selects for the random traits within populations and says these traits work in this environment, or these traits do not work in this environment. And thus, natural selection drives the process of evolution and helps mold animals and plants and fungi and protists and bacteria into forms and shapes that are capable of living in the environment, because it's really important. We kind of got to keep life going. And thankfully, through natural selection, evolution gives us the ability to keep going. Yeah, we change over time, over long periods of time, but that's not important. What's important is that we keep life alive.